In politics, the only poll that matters has been taken and tallied. But in sports, public opinion's all over the map, especially on topics like the Sooners' Secretary of Defense. The OSU Cowboys may have a better record to run on than the polls indicate. And what about the Thunder's approval ratings? As this NBA campaign drags on, from the Dodge Sports Desk, I'm Mike Sherman, and this is the post-election version of the Press Row Live. My guests today are multimedia editor Mike Kaler, who's going to talk about how the Ford Center crowds are responding and will respond to the Thunder, and vice versa. Columnist John Rohde, who will discuss where OU defensive coordinator Brent Venables fits into the Kansas State football coaching race. And columnist Barry Trammell, who will be there Saturday for late night in Lubbock, when what seems to be a campaign by two unlikely candidates continues with a runoff to stay in the BCS title picture. Barry, let's start with you first. How has OSU defied all the preseason projections, including your own, to stay in the thick of not only the Big 12 South race, but the BCS conversation?
Well, they won at Missouri 4 weeks ago. I mean, right now, if you looked at projections of what OSU would be and what they are, really, they're only one game off. That's the Missouri game. You figured they'd lose at Texas and lose at Missouri and have an excellent chance to win the rest of them. The difference is they're playing much better, even in defeat. The game at Texas they could have won. In victory, they've been very impressive. So they're obviously much further ahead than we thought. But they've still got two tough games left. Still have to go to Boulder. I don't think this is going to happen, but you don't want the Cowboys to, start busting their buttons too much, because this season could still get away from them if they don't take care of business. That being said, they've got a big-time team. I think they can score on anybody. Their defense is playing much better. They got a chance to win at Lubbock and turn college football back upside down.
What's the Cowboys' best chance for the upset in Lubbock, John?
Score more points. You always have to outscore these guys.
We've been saying that about Oklahoma State big games for a long time, that they would be a scoreathon. Missouri, supposed to be a scoreathon. Texas, supposed to be a scoreathon. Hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Those games have really been won by defenses, have they not?
Oh, to some degree. They've been won, I think, by strategy as much as anything. They condensed both games pretty good. At Texas, each team only had 8 possessions. I think there's going to be a lot more than 8 possessions Saturday night in Lubbock.
So is condensing the game, again, a strategy for OSU, trying to limit Tech's? I mean,
well,
they're going to try to play a
but
little
I'm not
ball.
sure you can do it, because Tech has 90-second possessions. Sometimes they have 20-second possessions. I mean, sometimes it's 3 incompletions and they punt, and then sometimes they score a touchdown in 40 seconds, and it's a lot harder to do against Tech, I think.
Well, we talk all the time about Des Bryant, and we'll talk all the time about Crabtree now, but OSU has the best running game in the Big 12, and that's what enabled them to do it. I mean, they're going to keep, if they play keep away, if they have the ball longer, then, at least they'll stay in it.
A question from a reader, Jerry, who wonders, hey, what's different about this Tech team? Is this just going to be another Texas Tech team that wins a big game but can't sustain it? What do you think, John?
Well, the turnaround happened after last year's game when the defense choked. Texas Tech, and by the time they got off the plane, they had a new defensive coordinator. They had lost one, and that's when the switch was made. It's defense.
You mean that other explosion in the press room?
Yeah, well, that was the rant game. But no, that's when the transformation took place. Their defense is much improved.
Okay, guys, just boiling this game down to its essence, though. Is it as simple as this? Last team with the ball. Are we finally expecting a scoreathon?
I am, because I think that's what Tech plays. 39-33 with Texas, and that was a fairly good defensive effort, I thought, by both teams. Both defenses played pretty good, and yet it was 39-33. So I think it'll be pretty high scoring.
Okay.
Jenny slides in.
Okay, we're talking Texas Tech. We're talking OSU. Is anybody here willing to pick OSU?
Oh, yeah.
Half the staff did in the paper today.
I said, is anybody
here?
I said, is anybody here?
I didn't study the picks. I picked Tech 31-30.
John, defend your pick.
I picked Tech by a touchdown. I think it's going to be similar to the Texas game. I think OSU will get popped in the mouth, settle down, make a game of it, stay in the game, linger around, and in the end, I think it'll be Tech.
Jenny?
Don't you guys think, though, that what OSU does running the ball is going to be really important? I picked Tech to win, too, because of Lubbock more than anything. But I think if OSU runs the ball well, Kendall Hunter has 150 plus, maybe a big day for him, I could see them winning this game. I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility that they've got the offensive firepower and the defensive might to do that in Lubbock.
Yeah, it's both teams, it's two offensive teams who have finally learned how to play defense, and they're both benefiting from that. And I think OSU, if you look back in the Missouri game, their defense came up big. Their defense played well against Texas and kept them in it. So I don't think it's beyond the pale to say they're going to win.
Let's talk, switching gears to OU. You talked about two offensive teams that finally learned how to play defense. In Norman, there's a team that built its reputation on defense that is now struggling a little bit on defense, but its defense coordinator, Brent Venables, is said to be a candidate at Kansas State. John, reconcile these two things. Low approval ratings in Sooner Nation for Brent Venables, high desire for him to maybe be the next coach at Kansas State.
When I talked to him 3 weeks ago when OU went back to K-State, I might have read this wrong, but I didn't think he was the least bit interested in Kansas State. Because the conversation quickly turned to the landscape. Both his parents died at the same time that K-State eventually hired Ron Prince. But the things that have happened since then and the things that happened then, how Bob Stoops embraced him and how he feels at home and in comfort, it is not as appealing a job. I think the leading candidate might be Bill Snyder.
Really?
I think I've heard he wants to get back into coaching. And hey, they might do it. I don't know. They're looking for a guy with head coaching experience. I mean, if Snyder's interested, I'm sure they'll listen. But I think they're going after a head man this time.
Barry, do you think that the performance at Kansas State by the Sooners in any way hurt Venables? I mean, they went up there, and that was a game. Really, they struggled on defense.
No. I think Brent is a long shot for the K-State job because of past history. '99, he leaves Kansas State to join Stoops' staff, and I don't think that set well with the K-State crowd. Then 2 or 3 years later, they asked him to come back and be the head coach in waiting. He decided not to, and I just think there's some people at Kansas State and maybe the president that's just sort of said.
He's leaving after next year.
Yeah, he is leaving, but he's not leaving yet, so he gets to make the pick. So I don't think Brent is in great standing up there. I think they're holding that against him. I think there's some really viable candidates at Kansas State of interest. I think John's right. I think it's going to be Bill Snyder.
You're kidding.
If it's not Bill Snyder, I think a guy they might look at is Dan McCarney. First of all, did an unbelievable job at Iowa State. Number two, he has the head coaching experience. Number three, he's a Snyder guy. They coached together at Iowa. McCarney, after he left Iowa State 2 years ago, is down at South Florida on the staff of Jim Leavitt, who is another Snyder guy.
They could come together.
So
Maybe Snyder for a few years.
I think Dan McCarney might be a pretty viable candidate as well.
Is that the kind of hire, though, that sort of gets Kansas State back in the conversation in the Big 12 North?
They're going to win football games. I don't know I have no idea if that's of interest to them, but with Dan McCarney, they'll win football games. Because I tell you, Iowa State did. And if you do it at Iowa State, you can darn sure do it at Kansas State.
Well, heck, 5 years ago, I think the North was inverted. K-State was on the top, and Missouri stunk, and Kansas stunk, and now it's the other way around.
Shifting gears to the Sooners and Sam Bradford and another beauty contest called the Heisman Trophy race. John, you and Jenny are sort of plugged into how the Heisman voting goes. Jenny, you talk to people a lot about the Heisman. John, you did or still do register in the Scripps Howard poll. Mm-hmm. How is Sam Bradford polling? How's it look for him?
Oh, I think he's in the top three. I think this week I had Graham Harrell, Sam Bradford, Colt McCoy, Michael Crabtree, and Des Bryant. I'm a Big 12 homer, and I make no apologies. I'm looking around. I'm looking at BYU. I'm looking at Utah. I'm looking at Florida. I don't see any of them in the top five.
Yeah,
Jenny, what are you hearing?
We agree on the top three. I don't know what the straw polls are going to say after this week. I do know that Graham Harrell is showing really well in the few that I look at. I think Sam Bradford is a guy that's going to get an invite to New York, and I think he still has a chance to be the guy. I think what happened last week in Lubbock reopened the race. If Texas wins that game and the way it was going to shake down, Colt McCoy was going to be right at the middle of that comeback. it's his. I mean, I think we can, just almost close up shop at that point in the Heisman conversation. But Texas not winning, and I just think it reopens the race. I was really thinking that they might only have maybe 3 finalists go to New York. Now I think they're probably looking at having 4 or 5 there, and I think Sam Bradford's definitely in that conversation.
But should it reopen the race? I mean, Colt McCoy lost 1 game, and then he was performing miracles before that.
He didn't have a good first half. His first half numbers were awful at Lubbock. And I think that made people think, oh, let's take a step back. There's one guy we can't forget about, and he doesn't happen to play in the Big 12. But he wears the crown, and his team is hot, and he doesn't put up unbelievable numbers, but he's the guy that makes Florida go, and that's Tim Tebow. And he's going to have a couple of big-time games left. I think Tebow could still get back in it.
It's not a good year for incumbents, though. I mean, it's a change election.
Hey, but
You don't have to forfeit the office.
Dan wasn't an incumbent.
That's right. Hey, coming back to the question of Sam Bradford, though, and style points, which you wrote about in today's newspaper, about how style points will matter as far as the BCS voters and the BCS polls go, but they're going to matter for Sam, too. The Sooners go down to College Station for a game. Really, they should win. Is it a name-your-score kind of win? And is this another Sam, 5 touchdowns will keep you in the running kind of game?
It'll be over 50, I would imagine, if they want it to be. Crying out loud, Texas A&M stinks.
Well, Kevin Wilson needs to help Sam out a little bit because he's not been having him throw many 2- and 3-yard touchdown passes in recent weeks. Every time they get near the goal line, they just hand it to their tailbacks, and it takes them 2 carries, and they get it in the end zone. He'd be a lot better off letting Sam throw some touchdown passes to the tight ends. Now, that's stat padding, but that's still the truth. So he could help Sam out a little bit.
Barry, you did some palm reading with Jerry Palm, the BCS guru. Tell us what he had to say about all this, sorting out the crazy Big 12 South and how the BCS standings will play a part in that.
Well, if there's a 3-way tie and everybody's beating each other, it comes down to BCS, and OU or OSU. OU and OSU won't be tied with each other. It'd be OU and OSU tied with Texas and Tech. OU's in the best shape in that situation. The Sooners have all the things you want in a 3-way tie. They have name recognition. They have the earliest loss, and they will have the latest victories. So OSU will have the earliest loss and some late momentum, but OSU's name recognition is not up there with some of the voters. Is that fair? No, but welcome to the polls. So I think, I don't see OSU winning a 3-way tie breaker. I do see OU winning one.
But in that 3-way tiebreaker, it really comes down to, for OSU, Tech would have to lose Saturday in Lubbock to the Cowboys and then win in Norman, right?
Win in Norman.
And that's the fly in the ointment?
I don't see Tech winning in Norman. I can see Tech maybe. If Tech's going to beat OU, I think they need to beat OSU first. I don't see them losing and saying, oh, let's get back up on our feet and win in Norman. Nobody ever wins in Norman is the biggest problem. 2 losses in 10 years for Bob Stoops. So, Tech got OSU and Texas in Lubbock, but they got to go to the place that's the hardest to win.
John, or does this put the Sooners sort of in the driver's seat, if there is such a thing in this Big 12 South race?
Well, they still need somebody. Yeah, I guess it does. And it's funny. Somebody goes, well, the bottom line is that there's a 3-way tie between Tech, Texas, and OU. Everybody will remember that Texas beat OU. Well, they've already forgotten because OU's ahead of Texas in the human polls that are used for the BCS, not in the AP. So Barry nailed it. I mean, I think does it revert all the way back to the preseason poll? Is OSU still paying the price for not being ranked higher in the preseason poll? Is it about tradition? Is it about history? And the answer to all these questions is yes. Mm-hmm. It definitely is. It's how far you have to climb. Oh, you didn't have to climb anywhere. They just had to hang around. OSU's had to climb.
And still has to climb. They're 9th in the BCS, OU's 6th.
And so really, when you come down to it, that loss at Texas that knocked them back on, sort of almost falling out of the top 10 is really the thing that hurts them most, more than where they started, right? I mean, they felt that they're penalized more for the loss to Texas.
We were talking, and you made a good point, which is if they get into that 3-way tie, OSU, comparing like OSU and Texas on November 30th, Texas will have not won a big game in quite a while because they got, they're on the gravy train now with with Baylor, Kansas, and A&M. So they
only hurt them in the computers.
Yeah, it'll hurt them in the computers, and they won't have any marquee games to be fresh in people's mind. It's possible that people will elevate the latecomers because that's what pollsters historically have done. But pollsters they're just kooky in their ways. I was telling you about a guy I know. He had Missouri, whatever, 2 or 3 or 4 when they played OSU, and OSU was 14 or 15 or 16, whatever they were in his ballot. So OSU goes to Columbia and beats Missouri. And so he kept Missouri ahead of OSU in his poll, just because he doesn't like to drop teams too far or raise them too high. That's just the kind of nonsense that you deal with in the polls.
Jenny, you were at the Ford Center last night when the Thunder faced the NBA champions, the Masters, and they learned a tough lesson at the foot of the Celtics. My question would be, are we in Oklahoma City, the NBA fans in Oklahoma City, learning a few lessons too, namely that these are not the Hornets? And will the warm embrace that sort of the NBA, that we've had for the NBA here, will the Green Bay of the NBA feeling, will that last sort of deep into January when the Thunder's really no longer playing any meaningful games?
Yeah, well, I think if we didn't already know that they're not the Hornets, I think we would have been asleep because that was pretty obvious from the get-go. They don't have anybody that's of the caliber of a Chris Paul yet, and they just don't have the consistency yet. So they are going to play a lot of meaningless games, in my estimation, as the season goes on. But John and I were sitting by each other last night at the game, and I thought he made a really interesting point in that it seemed like to us that there were less Celtics fans or less people being vocal for the Celtics there last night. Now, there was a decent amount of green, but it wasn't as much as you'd think after a championship season and with a team that is where the Thunder is right now. So it seems like to me that the people that were there were largely there to cheer on the home team. So will that kind of excitement wane as the season goes on? I'm sure it probably will to some degree, but it was interesting, though, to see that there wasn't sort of that overwhelming support behind the other team that was there. So yeah. I don't know. I think that bodes well that the people will continue to be excited, at least, as long as they possibly can will themselves to be excited.
It wasn't like the Celtics didn't give their fans a lot to cheer about last night either.
Yeah.
And you really never heard one of those kind of, hey, we're here and we're taking over this crowd kind of applause. No, it was just sort of muffled. What was interesting, and you brought this up, Barry, the Hornets in 2 seasons here never played a meaningless game. Think about that. The thought of the playoffs, although maybe it was a sort of only the dreamers could dream of it starting off, but they were in playoff contention mathematically every step of the way, and it seems like just the constitution of this team, what they've got, that's not going to be the case relatively soon.
Well, I think I think that's kind of unique to. I think we're the only ones worrying about that. On Sunday night, I watched the game with some regular people. And they were, it was the first chance to win, and people were getting off the couch and standing up and cheering at the TV because they had a chance to beat the Timberwolves, for crying out loud. And they were talking about it beforehand and wearing shirts and everything. So I think the honeymoon's going to last all year long. And people know they're going to be lousy, but it's kind of like when you go and you see your kid playing Little League who's not quite very adept at sports. You're still going to cheer for your kid because they're your kid, even though they're playing far, far right field. So, it's just one of those things. Not that I know anything.
Breaking down the Thunder, what is it? 1-3. They did beat the T-Wolves at home in a game that really felt like you got to get this game. But what out of this 4-game start is there to be sort of optimistic about and sort of, hey, that's good for them? What about it, Barry?
That's too long a
Anybody else?
They got, you know what? They got a lot of power forwards and they got a lot of slashers. And I guess you need some of those. So it's just not a very well put together roster. They don't have a good point guard. They don't have any inside presence. They don't have anybody that can shoot. With the possible exception of Kevin Durant. I used to know a guy that looked a whole lot like Durant and wore burnt orange, and he could make baskets. This guy hadn't shown me that yet. But, they got some guys. you can get excited about. Russell Westbrook, you can sort of get excited about. And, Desmond's the old Desmond. You can get excited about Desmond Mason. And Wilcox dunks about once every half or so. So, I mean, you got some things you can get fired up about, but, they're going to have to put the roster together a little bit better for us to really get serious about wins and losses with this team.
You know what I think is interesting is you mentioned Desmond, and to me, Desmond and Joe Smith are the guys that, if you're on that coaching staff, you want to turn to the younger guys and say, watch these two guys. Joe Smith, for as long as he's been in the league, and I just am, every time he's on the floor, I think, well, he just made a play that you wouldn't expect somebody who's been in the league that long to make. He's hustling. He plays well. He knows his strengths. He has his spots where he's automatic from. I mean, he's playing that role of P.J. Brown. Everybody remembers what P.J. Brown was for the Hornets, for a young Hornets team. I think Joe Smith can play that sort of role for this team. And I think if guys, if they say to Kevin Durant or Johan Petro or whoever, follow Joe Smith around. And we were having the conversation at one point that Jeff Green needs to follow Desmond around. I mean, if they could just tell these guys, watch everything they do and do everything they do, I think it'd be beneficial. Those two guys, to me, are bright spots because they're going to hopefully show the younger guys how this works, how to hustle, how to play hard, how to be true professionals.
One thing, though, and I agree about the professionalism of those two guys, but one difference I saw from opening night and then last night I sort of caught myself at a few times saying, you know what, Desmond looked old during that stretch, and Joe Smith looked old. I think when they play, when they play really good teams, I think you see their shortcomings.
Leon Poe made Joe Smith look a little old. I mean, that was a very young guy who was very powerful against, a guy who's been in the league 13 years. He was having a hard time keeping up with him. But didn't you think, last week on the show, Barry said that, Jeff Green ought to attach himself to Desmond. And then last night, lo and behold, he's throwing himself around. He's running down blocking shots in the fourth quarter when the game's on the line. Maybe he listened.
Yeah, he's talking about it too, because we spoke about 10 minutes about just what do you learn from Desmond and are you asking? And maybe they were just politically correct answers. But, there are similarities. And 5-6 years from now, Jeff Green will be Desmond Mason, and vice versa. Here's the deal: it's the
better
young
shot.
Yeah, it's the young and the old that they got here, and it's a tough mix to really. And if you're missing some parts, it doesn't work. Here's the deal: you're right, the honeymoon will last, but I think even people in the Thunder front office would love to hit the fast forward button. Just say, what's our record going to be? When are we going to draft? Who are we going to get? But you got to go through this.
There's a lot of great. The only problem is for basketball fans. There's a lot of great NBA nights in between now and then. And listen, watching the Celtics play. If you love basketball, what a team! They didn't look like a team that was like resting on its laurels from last season. They look like we're going for 66 again. 31-10 on the road last year, and it looked like they were thinking about that again. They've lost their one road game for the month a couple weeks ago, or last week at Indiana. Listen, now let's go for the bonus question, guys. Who was your favorite sporting president? Barack Obama. He's a basketball player, and he's talking about putting up a court at the White House. I don't remember another guy coming to the White House talking about playing basketball. Bill Clinton, I guess he loved to watch basketball when the Hogs were playing. But who's your favorite sporting president? We'll go with you first, Mike Kaler.
I'm going to say Teddy Roosevelt. He wrote about the strenuous life. He liked to get out there and run around and shoot giant animals and attack Cuba when he had a chance to. So I'd say TR.
I've always thought of you as the outdoors type. Jenny.
Big game Mike is what we call him, right? I'm going to go with Jerry Ford. Played on the Michigan national championship teams, and I believe 50 and 52. I think an offensive lineman, if I recall, and I think offensive linemen are underrated as intelligent guys, so I'm going to go with President Ford.
Played without hard helmets. Played with the soft helmets, I do believe.
Yeah, it was a little before 50 and 52.
Was it? When
it was in the 30s.
Oh, was it 30? I think it was 30 and 32. I'm sorry.
The inspiration for a bad George Clooney movie called Leatherheads, I guess. John.
I'm going to go with JFK. He played golf. Great natural athlete. And he played fast golf. Of course, you get out of your way if you're the president. Mind if we play
that's
through?
Good.
Yeah, that's good. Pick it up. But I'll go with JFK.
Barry?
I'm going to go with Ronald Reagan because Ronnie did exactly what all of us at this table did, which is I think he liked sports, and then he figured out, you know what, I'm just not very good at it, good enough to keep at it. So we've turned to writing. He turned to broadcasting with that radio station in Iowa. Reed broadcast the Cub games over teletype. So the great communicator he was, and hopefully we can be the same.
Win one for the Gipper. Hey, listen, that's all for Press Row Live. Stay with the best coverage team anywhere, 24/7 at newsok.com and every day in the New Look, Oklahoma.